So welcome to the league start, everybody. I hope you're hyped as fuck. So I would like to watch the video from the one and only Kripparian. He made a video about playing SSF. You should play in SSF. All right, let's go.
Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparian here. Today, I have a promised video for you guys. We're going to talk about solo self-found. Why would you even bother playing it? And it's a pretty interesting topic. It is one that I think people will have their own personal view of, and I will give you guys my personal view of it. I think, you play video games however you wish, however results in you having the most fun. I am not one to judge, but for me, the idea of solo self-found in action RPGs has really revolutionized my appeal, my love for this type of game, and I kind of want to preach about it in a way because I kind of went through that conversion, and I think a lot of people haven't yet because they haven't really understood the advantages.
Preach away,
So
Kripp.
let's talk about them. Let's talk about the differences of playing just a normal POE2 league or whatever ARPG versus solo self-found. And today I'll go over that, and also I'll give you guys a few tips if you do want to play solo self-found in the upcoming POE2 league or whenever, really. So ultimately, it kind of came down to I'm really good at trading in video games. You guys might
Small
know
flex.
from videos well over a decade ago how I was making crazy amounts of gold in World of Warcraft. It was not just a World of Warcraft thing. I've learned to realize how a lot of game systems and their marketplaces work. And yeah, it's pretty easy to exploit. Some of the richest players in Path of Exile, Path of Exile 1 especially, they don't even really play the game. They just trade items or they offer mirror services, and that really results in the highest accumulation of wealth. It is an extreme case, but it does offer an understanding of how it works for most people. Because
I cannot do that. I don't like it, and I just can't do this. It's
most
not my
people,
thing.
yes, they still go and play the game, but they also spend a lot of time looking up what items are available, for sale online, what kind of items they can sell, the prices. They're basically playing a
I'm just
part of
gonna
the
run you
game
mix it
that
up.
isn't so much gameplay as it is kind of like playing markets. And for someone like me, I've played so many games, and even IRL markets, I know a few things. It's at a point where it is a bit samey. That experience that I get from doing it in Path of Exile 2 is hardly different doing it in any game that I've played in the past. And that is a big problem for me. It also is a big problem that how should I say this? It's a bigger problem in a game like Path of Exile 2 because there's a huge focus on like a new season or a new league. If you look at a game like World of Warcraft, there's kind of like the old hoarders of gold, right? So because there's people that just have hordes of gold because they've been playing for a long time, any kind of activity that you do kind of like siphons off of them. So it doesn't have so much like cutthroat, rat race type of situation as Path of Exile does, because anything you do just generates gold because there's just like gold lying around. Now, when there is a new seasonal reset in Path of Exile 2, it's certainly exciting. It's exciting to play, and trust me, it's plenty exciting to play, even if you don't engage with the markets. It just is exciting to play because there's lots of new stuff to do and experience.
That's true.
But because there is this economy reset, the entire game, if you wish to play optimally, becomes one enormous rat race. Because this happens every single league. There becomes activities that you do that are crazy profitable, and having really strong characters really early and getting into that often before before it's nerfed results in incredible amount of wealth gain.
But that is so stressful. Like for me, doing that takes all the fun out of the game, kinda. I understand that for some people that is the fun in the game. So I'm not judging.
So this results in a few things. The first is there is an incredible pressure on playing a very overpowered build. I see this as a downside because you often don't get to tailor what you actually want to play. Like if you are a minion enjoyer, for example, and minions do not seem to be very good next season, and by the way, they don't, well, you are going to shoot yourself in the foot if you try to play a type of build that you like, because you're going to have to play the really OP stuff if you want to be, kind of top tier, if you really want to play optimally. There is also a huge pressure on profitable farming. Now, this might be a bit of an alien concept to those that haven't played Solo Self-Found, but for now, let's just leave it with the example that we had in a previous season in Path of Exile with the new temple that they had, and kind of making those like crazy long snakes and just like basically pumping out divines. Basically, if you don't do that, you are going to be very poor. You're
Yep.
almost wasting your time even playing the game if you want to play optimally and kind of maintain a reasonable level of wealth in the game. And on one hand, that can be kind of cool because you're often engaging with, new mechanics. Not always, though. But in my opinion, this is also a negative because it usually pushes you very heavily into doing kind of like a singular activity. Now, to be fair, the singular activities in Path of Exile, they can have pretty rich levels of depth, so it's not like it's boring, but it's not like you're experiencing the entirety of the game. You're really hyper focusing on one part of it.
That's so true. I also see that I understand for a new player, maybe it's better to focus on one part of the game and learning parts every, like deep mechanic one by one after each other. But like you're completely, as if you, as a new player beginning and just focusing on one, you're absolutely like oblivious of what is going on around the game. And sometimes you just like approach a mechanic that is just making you, like the most profits, even though if you just interact with it for the currency that you get out of it, it doesn't mean necessarily that you're like understanding the mechanic or what is the use of the stuff that this mechanic is kind of like giving to you.
And there, of course, is an immense pressure on playtime. Like, if you're doing the first two things really, really well, but you're not playing like, 10, 15-hour days at league start, well, the other guys that are going to be ahead of you, and often far ahead of you. And that is a little bit of a problem because a huge amount of wealth is gained in the early days if you have a strong presence in the factors that I mentioned. And there's another thing that I think is also a pretty big negative for me, that several game systems just kind of fail if you trade. One of those is the
Generally, for me, like one of the main aspects why I play Path of Exile, what one aspect that gives me really the dopamine, let's say, is having a progression, is the whole progression system, is progressing through a character, bringing someone from being a totally ass crack character on the beach, you have nothing, you wake up, you take a fucking zombies skeleton and try to beat people up with it, onto a god that is deleting celestial bodies, and I don't know. So this progression is for me the main thing, that like one of the main factors that is the game, is the enjoyment factor of the game. And I feel with trade you're diluting this progression, well, like you're, by buying your gems, by getting the gear ahead of time, like ahead of your, let's say, place that you are during the campaign or even in mapping, you're like jumping ahead, so you're like skipping a lot of progression let's say you have like 100 points of progression from for a character. It's you're not going through it one by one anymore. You're like going from jumping from 10 to 30 and from 30 to 50. It depends like how you accumulate wealth. But that's one thing that was really bothering me in trade, this dilution of progression.
The skill gems, for example. The
There
skill
you go.
gems offer a pretty interesting and meaningful level of progression in the game where you get a certain skill gem and then, you kind of move up a few map tiers because you gain that much power and then you get that type of skill gem. You go to like 18, then you go to the higher maps, you find level 19 skill gems. So you kind of like, follow the progression of the game. And trading many different ways. This is just one example really does kind of cheat that progression quite a bit.
True.
The idea that you often are pushed to do one mechanic is one that has been very true in Path of Exile's history. It's not one that I can point so easily as I can to the temple in the previous league, but it usually is a case where people find a very efficient type of farming strategy, and that usually doesn't engage with very much of the game. And when they find that efficient strategy, sometimes it's a combination of using like certain tablets or certain maps or certain builds or just certain activities, certain mechanics, whatever it is. You see a lot of videos out there, I did this and got this much divine per hour or something like that. It usually is
Per
like a
hour thing.
hyper focus method. So it doesn't necessarily have to be pushed within the game, but the game, how they naturally work, if you want to maximize your divines per hour, you're once again kind of in that trap of playing a fairly narrow version of the game. And if you do all of those things well, you actually encounter another thing that I would personally say is a downside, where very high rarity items actually become trivialized
Yep.
and deterministic if you are a highly efficient player. But also, if you are not a highly efficient player, these things can be totally out of reach. One example in POE1, there's a notable belt called Mage Blood, which is why some people got pretty excited about the Mage Blood teaser that we got for this season. It is a incredibly powerful item that power gamers pretty much just get a few days into each league, because if you follow the steps to success. That's just what you get. You
Yep.
get the powerful stuff. Someone's going to find a mage blood in the law of numbers, and if you are gaming the economy like crazy and you can
Gotta
afford
have
the
it.
early versions of these items, you're just going to have them. But if you don't play under those kind of like restrictions, you might literally never get one. I have seen lots of Reddit posts about players who try to save up their divines for a mage blood, and what happens is the price actually outpaces their ability to generate that amount of currency, which leads to them literally never getting one because they don't play efficiently enough and they just don't play enough. So that is also a very crazy divide. It's a feast or famine, and there's honestly, I think there's quite few people in the middle of that kind of playing both sides. Ultimately, the biggest thing for me is if you are like a veteran of the game playing in a trade environment, especially in an efficient trade environment, which we now have in Path of Exile
Yep.
2, it really does kind of feel like cheating, where you just bypass rarity, you bypass RNG, you just kind of bypass tiers, bypass progression. You really just, you're playing with Game Shark, basically, okay? So,
Wow, that was a
the
throwback.
opposite side, the flip side. What about solo self-found? What's so great about it? So, I think one of the best comparisons that I can give to at least a good number of the people watching is playing solo self-found is a lot like playing the arena version of Hearthstone. Your decks are going to be much weaker, but they're going to be quite interesting, and you're going to have to figure out how you're actually going to win with what you have. and in many different ways.
That's so true. And that, brings you to explore the game more. You always don't have the best in slot option for you just a couple of clicks away, but you have to kind of improvise.
You're going to have to think on your feet and in many different situations, not just hyper focus learning like one deck as you might in Constructed. All right, enough of that. So, what does that mean for actual Path of Exile or ARPGs? So, the main incentive in Solo Self-Found is to play the game. That's
Yep,
pretty much it.
that's
Okay.
it.
If you want your character to be stronger, what you have to do is play the game. You have to go and do content and kill monsters. Okay. You have to play the game in order to progress. You have to play the game in order to have your character gain power. You have to play the game to get, the highest rarity drops. You cannot hyper focus on a singular mechanic because if you do, you're just not going to obtain the multitude of items that come from the other mechanics. For example, if you have a crazy profitable delirium strategy, well, yes, that's great and all, but how are you going to get things from Breach? You're just not,
Not.
right? If you want things from Breach, what you're going to have to do is Breach. You have to play the game. And that means that you really experience the fullness of the game. The incentives are actually set up correctly for you to enjoy the game because you will have to engage with all aspects of it.
That's the most important thing. There is like no skipping in SSF. If you see a mechanic, you're gonna do it most probably. There is no skipping. Oh, I'm not doing this. You get a mechanic, you do it.
That's really the key. And that is one that has really kind of changed my view about the game mode. I was a little bit skeptical when I saw players doing self-imposed SSF many years ago in Path of Exile 1, but this is kind of like the moment that clicked for me. So let's kind of go over some of the big downsides from playing trade and see how they work out in solo self-found. So is there a lot of pressure on playing a really OP build when there's a
No.
new season? There is still some pressure. That is actually true. You can't really get away from that because your first character is kind of the one that opens up the ability to get good items, right? And you want to kind of access the good items still fairly quickly, right? So you typically, even if you're playing SSF, you don't want to play like a total jank build. You still want to have some kind of plan. It might be a good idea to still follow like a build guide, but there are a few things to consider still. Now, in terms of profitable farming, there's almost no pressure for that. And I think the previous season, with the temple being so crazy, like in Trade League, people were doing 10,000 divine per hour or
These
something like that.
numbers
Just like per day. I don't even know. It doesn't matter, right? Like infinity currency, basically. I had that in solo
out of this
self-found. I
world.
made a little snake temple of my own. Did I just play that?
No.
No, because again, as good as the temple was, well, I needed some catalysts, and I needed some breach rings. I needed some items from ritual. So I
Then you gotta do
still
it.
had to engage with the rest of the game. In a case where one mechanic was so unbelievably broken and rewarding compared to all others, I still had to engage with the entirety of the game.
You
So
gotta.
I think that is pretty awesome.
Yep. I
Another one
agree.
is there is minimal pressure on playtime. If you play less, you're going to have a less powerful character, you're going to find less stuff, but you're not going to encounter that situation where if you play less, you're literally never going to be able to obtain a mage blood without finding one. Actually, that part is kind of going to hold true in solo self-found as well, but that's kind of the point. In solo self-found, the power levels are lower, but that is actually a good thing in some ways.
I think so too. I think you're not just like one shotting all the game. You're just like da 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 because you're not finding that like super OP items. Maybe one you can make, but it's not gonna be every slot. So there is actually some challenge to the game. It's like more engaging in that way also. In gameplay way also, it makes it more engaging. because of lack of the resources.
At least. One downside I want to bring up is solo self-found does require more stash tabs. So if you have
Yeah,
not
sure.
purchased the additional stash tabs
Gotta
in
hold it up.
Path of Exile 2, you might be a little bit hard-pressed to play solo self-found because you definitely need some space. Now, you still want some stash tabs if you're playing Trade League, arguably more if you're like a crazy hyper trader, but it is what it is. Solo self-found also is what it implies in the SSF, solo self-found. You do not play with other people. This is a pretty big factor for some people. Some people really like to play with other people, and if you really like to play with other people in Path of Exile, you should do that.
Hell
That's what
yeah,
you
you
should do.
should do it.
Okay.
Do
But
whatever
for me,
makes is fun
I
for
just
you.
kind of like to play by myself these days. I've kind of grown into that. The other thing that I really like that I want to kind of throw in there is there's no real limit to endgame, and that kind of ties into the rare drops. Like, rare drops in solo self-found are really exciting. Like last league, I picked up a Mjolnir, and
Oh
is
yeah.
Mjolnir a good item?
Mm,
No. But for like solo self-found, it's kind of like maybe good enough, and it really got me to thinking in like what I could actually do with it because it's such a rare item. It's an opportunity to play, a build I perhaps have not played before. So
you
that's,
said it.
that's
You
really
said it
awesome.
right.
And yes, you won't get like the mage blood or anything like that, but ultimately you are going to have a lower power character, but there is a real beauty to that, in my opinion, because no one's going to carry you through content. No one is going to like sell you the item that you need to make your character 10 times more powerful. Having to kind of grind it out on your own at the end of the day just feels like a lot more rewarding.
Hell yeah.
And because of that, and because the power levels are fairly lower, there's really no cap to end game. Many times I've played, a trade version of an ARPG or even Path of Exile 1. I've actually never played Path of Exile 2 trading, but of course, I watch streams. I know what's happening in the game. You
Surely you know.
sometimes experience that point where your character really cannot be meaningfully stronger, but you kind of want to keep playing it. You don't really want to reroll, but then you play it and it just kind of feels pointless because it's already the strongest version that the character could be.
Yep.
When you
Time to
play
reroll.
in a trade environment, this is a point that you reach
So
sometimes
fast.
fairly quickly if you are an efficient player. And if you're someone that likes to roll new characters all the time, this might not be a problem whatsoever. But for me, I kind of get attached to some of the characters and builds that I play. And in solo self-found, the limit to like peaking in power and peaking in gear and peaking in everything, it's just so distant.
Yep.
And because I have to earn it to get there, the progression always feels good and it takes me a long time. Like, there's actually been many leagues where I just play one character,
Yep.
several characters and some others and lots and others, but I can play a single character league and feel satisfied and actually play for like a month at a time, for example. So it is very big difference in playstyle, and hopefully I've offered you guys a little bit of understanding. Now, for those of you that are interested in solo self-found, I do have a few tips, especially if you have not tried it before, I would
Let's get
say.
into it.
So again, you definitely want to start on a strong build, at least a pretty strong build, but I think it's also important to start on a class that has the potential to play lots of different kinds of builds. And this is because you might get a Mjolnir, basically. You might get a really cool rare drop, and you might want to actually use it. You might not want to make an entirely new character, The Path of Exile 2
Sure.
campaign, some people love it, some people do not love it. Okay, and the thought of going through it again for an alt is not a pleasing thought for some people. So, believe it or not. Having a
Believe it or
character that
not.
can pivot to a wide variety of builds is pretty important. And I just kind of want to point that out that monks, they generally have limited options. They're pretty good with like attacks and like triggered skills, but it really falls off pretty hard after that. There are some options, and yeah, some options maybe with like minions, but like, yeah, I don't know. Sork is also quite limited, a little bit less so now that we got the Chrono buff. I quite like playing Chrono, but still fairly limited because if you don't want to play something that involves like Energy Shield, you kind of have to go really far, and that
Yep.
becomes a bit of a problem. I
Sure.
also think that the Mercenary class is fairly limited. Again, maybe a little bit less so because it seems like they're buffing the Gemling, so maybe not too bad. But there's certainly some big winners out there,
Ooh.
like Witch is just incredible. Between Lich, Abyssal Lich, and Blood Mage, I don't even know anymore. But Infernalist, you can pretty much play any build in the game. You know, that's just like the full range of it. If you want to play
Wonderful.
Warrior, Titan can pretty much play any build in the game because of the efficiency in the 50% node being so crazy. So there's definitely some big winners in that, and I certainly do factor that in when I am playing in a new league. I typically want to play something that is very flexible. I guess another one that is also very flexible is Druids,
Yep.
because the Oracle has just like incredible availability to a variety of nodes and extreme efficiency with the I think it's Unseen Path. I think it's called. So that one is really good. Another one that I want to kind of point out is in Trade League, especially if you play with other people, you often can just focus entirely on damage. In Solo Self-Found, you cannot do that. You really want to play a character that is well-rounded, that has good damage, good clear, and good survivability. And
Yeah, all
honestly, I would
arounder.
even aim for great survivability because you really don't want to lose out on content because your character dies, because you can't cheat those things. You know, if your character dies when you're running an extremely high value map, you can't just trade for another one. You'll have to find another one, and that
Yep.
might take a really long time. So, survivability on your character is absolutely something you need to factor in, and that can, in some ways, look like a limitation on some builds, but I would say that all builds can skew into survivability, especially now that we have armor and evasion buffed on the skill tree and on the items. There are options available. It's just that a lot of people who play in trade leagues literally just ignore them.
Yep.
So there is that. In terms of kind of your goals when you're starting out playing solo self-found, the main thing that I would aim for is to get to high tier waystones, like high tier maps. And it's
Facts.
okay to kind of burn through all the currency and stuff that you get in order to get to like tier 15. If you're not at tier 15, it's okay to burn pretty much any currency that you find along the way for character power and progression
Yep.
speed. Because you really need to kind of climb the character power to get there.
You get to use all the currency in the game when you're playing SSF. You're not afraid to use your exalts in the campaign when you get it. You know, you're even excited because you get it and it's like, oh, I'm gonna get more power because I'm gonna use it immediately. And I think that's just wonderful.
But once you get to the highest tier waystones, the highest tier maps, you are able to get very good base items. And at that point, you are able to get like the good gear, basically. So
Yep.
getting there is really important. Once you get there, I actually like to be a bit more conservative, especially with the higher rarity currencies and items that I get. Like I might be a bit more choosy with how I use like especially perfect transmutes and things like that, even on the lower end of currencies, just because at that point you are starting to find items of very high potential worth. And you kind of want to get a few freebies, especially at the start. And it's best to not dump too much of the high value currency immediately, again, is my experience.
True.
Another one that I like is trying to not spend gold until hitting certain breakpoints with gambling. So the reason why gambling is very powerful,
I disagree
especially
a
in
bit.
solo self-found, is because you're able to get a lot of items that are otherwise just extreme rarity drops. So like jewelry, for example, really doesn't drop very often in Path of Exile 2. It's kind of like Ruthless in Path of Exile 1. And most characters are going to want an amulet with +3 to skills. This is an item level 75 affix, which you can gamble regularly, I believe, if you're over level 90. I think you want level 91 just to be safe.
Yep.
You can just check the item level because maybe this is something that changes in the future as well. But the idea being that if you're playing solo self-found, you can't just buy a +3 amulet from someone else. You have to get one. How do you get one? Well, you have to find efficient ways to get very high rarity affixes on a rare base. Well,
Yeah.
gambling gets you a lot of those bases. And that's kind of the beauty of solo self-found. It's on you to kind of figure out these puzzles and to figure out how you can actually obtain, the high power, the high influence items to make your characters into, that true peak performance. Very
True.
cool part about the game that really gets trivialized in many ways in Trade League, at least in my opinion. Another thing that I really like to do when I play solo self-found, now this is one for the people with lots of stash tabs probably, but there is the 3-to-1 recipe that you can use, and it is often used by players for like upping waystones and that kind of stuff, but I really like to use it on items that have rare bases. So for example, jewelry. All those amulets that I gamble, I don't just like throw them in the garbage. I pretty much just try to keep them and 3-to-1 them. Now,
Yep.
the 3-to-1 recipe in Path of Exile utilizes the lowest item level of your items as the new item. So you need to be careful with that. Like if you're trying to get a +3 amulet, you typically want to make them all rare because 3 rare ones will give you a rare amulet, 3 blues will give you a blue, and as such. Now the idea is that if you're going to want to try to get from the 3-to-1 recipe potentially a +3 amulet, you only want to use amulets that are at least item level 75. But I do this recipe especially for jewelry, for rings, for belts. It's extremely good for jewels because you can't even gamble jewels. You literally have to find them. Well, if you want to find like 40% more jewels, you use the 3-to-1 recipe. And jewels don't even have an item level, so you can start hoarding jewels right from the start
Yep.
of the game. And this
It's
is
true.
going to be especially powerful in the upcoming season where we get new base types from like the breach mechanic, the tree mechanic, let's say. There's going to be like crazy amulets and that kind of stuff. And there's going to be things like, for example, there's going to be the amulets that have 2 instilled nodes on them.
Yep.
And if you get
Broken
3 of
ones.
those, it's kind of like getting a free one, right? So
Yeah.
there's some really powerful things that you can get through that system. Because again, in solo self-found, you got to work for every single piece and you got to try to get the most out of it every time. And that is the
Yes.
beauty at the end of the day. Hopefully, you picked up a few pointers and you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next.
Well, amazing video. Be sure to subscribe to Kripp. I'll leave the link of this channel and this video down in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And yeah, I think I said everything that I needed to say, and I have nothing to add. So happy league launch, everyone, and see you in the next one. All right.